SNP spokesperson Pete Wishart.
And thank you ever so much, Mr. Speaker. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? What an absolute and utter disaster. And to see the Leader of the House standing there, no apology, no contrition, no ability to let it sink in just how bad things have come. The last place that he wanted to be today was at that dispatch box, doing exactly the opposite and saying exactly everything that he didn't say 2 weeks ago when he presented that motion. And they were doing everything possible yesterday to get to 10 o'clock so this debate wouldn't be had, only to be told by the honourable member from Christchurch with the word of object. Best laid plans and all that. So what we've got is another day of headlines, another day of examining Tory sleaze. And what has happened in these 13 days since he was last at that dispatch box? Well, we know that public trust in this government is now at an all-time low. Their inboxes have been swamped with furious constituents demanding knowing what they're going to do about all of this. Day after day, there's been endless Tory sleaze stories in the national newspapers that they've all been waking up to. Companies are now dispensing with the services of Tory MPs in these lucrative second jobs because of the stink that this has always created. And they have lost their lead in the opinion polls. Things couldn't actually be worse for them. They would actually now be faced with losing their seats if a general election was called tomorrow. And they have the Leader of the House to thank them for their current sorry predicament. This little plan to save their pal was hatched between the Leader of the House and the Government Chief Whip, backed enthusiastically by the Prime Minister, in order to have their pal saved. And this was backed enthusiastically with him. He's supposed to be the clever one. It's him that's got the Eton education, the millions in the Caymans. This is all on him, and he is responsible for this mess. Just let's remind ourselves of what he said 13 days ago. He was so passionate in his defence of his good friend Owen Paterson that he even invoked one of his favourite Latin phrases. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. He extolled us in this house in an almost Atticus Finch-like defence for his good friend. His good friend, fairly unmaligned and maltreated by this house. And for someone who had just pocketed a cool £500,000 and had been found to have broken our rules in a consistent and egregious manner, now he's here doing the exact opposite. If he had even any sense of dignity, if he had a smidgen of self-respect, he would be long gone, Mr. Speaker. You don't usually survive something like this. You don't survive a story lasting 13 days. He has defied the laws of political science, and it's amazing that we still find him at this dispatch box today. But let's remind us of what we're actually doing today. We are rescinding a committee that they whipped in order to achieve a kangaroo court committee of corruption that had a Tory majority and a Tory chair. They didn't like the result of our existing Standards Committee. So not only did they set aside its finding, they actually decided that they would replace that committee itself. They are so arrogant and sense of entitlements there that they really thought they would get away with it. And they would have got away with it if it wasn't for those pesky constituents. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank them for giving away, and I think that the public have made very clear over the last 2 weeks their demands for high standards. So, to be consistent with the new, more respectable position the government had, does the member agree with me that they must revisit and resile from clauses in the election bill which would allow them to, through strategic policy statements, impose their will on the Electoral Commission and to block outcomes that they don't like from that? And does the member agree that proceeding with those aspects of the election bill would make very clear that they have not learnt the lesson that messing with the independent oversight of politicians, in this case donations and spendings, is really off limits?
Absolutely, and I utterly agree with the Honourable Lady. You would think today might just be a watershed for them, that they'll look at the whole package of measures that they've had to decrease the legitimacy of this House and their electoral processes, and they would do the right thing in the back of that. But I have to say to the Honourable Lady, knowing them the way that I do, I doubt whether that might happen. I'll give way for the last time to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the honourable member, and he's being very gracious. And indeed, I extend my sympathies to the Leader of the House for having been sent out to bat on this very sticky wicket. But would the honourable member agree that rather than the highly respected independent Commissioner for Standards resigning, as was mooted by ministers when they felt invincible, that rather than her resigning, it should be the Prime Minister who should be considering his position, given that he forced his Conservative MPs to vote to protect his paid lobbyist friend rather than doing what is right, and thereby doing, he has egregiously eroded our democracy.
Yes, well absolutely, and I'm grateful to the honourable friend, because that brings me on to the malicious, malign attempt to undermine and smear our Standards Commissioner. Absolutely and utterly disgraceful. When we heard the Business Secretary last week saying that she should consider her position, she shouldn't be considering her position. The Leader of the House should be considering his position, as should the Prime Minister. It's because they needed to undermine the Standards Commissioner in order for the silly, stupid plan to work for them. And of course, it hasn't worked at all. So, what now? Their failure to properly apologise and to recognise what they've done and to show any sort of contrition or shame, as the honourable member says, means that this will not go away. This is going to go on. I mean, we're now in this 30th day. I suspect that this is going to rumble through to just about Christmas. Until they get up and show this House in the country that they're truly sorry about what they've done, that they'll make every effort to try and ensure that this House is cleaned up, I'm afraid it's not going to get any better for the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues in the backbench. And I note that even the most loyal of Conservative backbenchers are actually talking about replacing the Prime Minister and ensuring that these out-of-touch Brexiteers who seem to be running the Conservative Party get no place near making decisions like this again in the future. There's a new generation of Conservatives up there. Some of them are actually even quite good. Take control of this away from them. They cannot do it. They do not know what they are doing. They have got you into this mess. It is up to you to clean them out and make sure that they're replaced. Because can I tell you something? They are not working in your interests, and they are doing everything possible to make sure that you do not get elected. I believe, Mr Speaker, the days of faux buffoonery is coming to an end, and it's coming to an end in the back of all of this. But the Leader of the House's position, I say to him, as somebody who I respect very, very dearly, his position is totally and utterly untenable. You can't come to this House and say one thing passionately and with great concern and take up nearly all the time to do it, then come back 2 weeks later and say the exact opposite. It just doesn't happen in politics. And to even think you'd get away with it is even beyond reason, and certainly nothing like I've ever seen in my 20 years in this House. What he does is define political gravity. He's opened a Pandora's box of Tory sleaze, and it was him that took the lid off, and we could all see what's inside of this. They think this is all over. It's not over yet. It's barely just begun.
Siobhan Liam Cash.